Michael Cox, give me a 30-second kind of picture of your life, your family, elevator pitch. Here's who I am.
My immediate family or family beyond that?
You pick.
I'll give you both.
Sweet.
I am one of 4 children in my family of origin, second oldest. My brother, who is no longer with us, but is older about 3 years, a little bit more than 3 years. And I have 2 younger sisters, about 2 and 3 years younger than me.
Okay.
Parents, my mom and dad were together for a long time before my dad passed away about 5 years ago. They were together about 47 years.
Right.
And married to Coloma, 22 years in July.
Come on.
It's been quite a ride.
Yeah.
Quite a ride, but a great 22 years. Known each other for 23.
Yeah.
Met on the beach at Beach Reach, a ministry.
Reach.
Yeah, it's ministry down in South Padre. College students go and minister to other college students during spring break. It's been going on for a long time. We were both there separately. I was there with Texas A&M University because I was doing an internship there. She was there with West Texas A&M University. And we met randomly. She was dancing salsa in the fellowship hall of a Baptist church, no less. Ooh,
that is disallowed. That is not what is going on.
Right? She was teaching, I guess at the time, swing dancing was a big deal for college students. And she was like, walked in, I wasn't in there yet, and she was like, hey, you ever know how to salsa dance? And they're like, no. And so she's teaching them how to salsa dance.
So Natalie and I went on a date one time, and she was like, this would be really fun. Let's go swing dancing, And so we show up to this dance hall, and I can't dance at all, right? And I'm not going to lie, like Natalie's great, but she's not a dancer either. But she can at least have fun with it.
Yeah.
It was just like an execution by humiliation, just over and over. I was the one guy that they had to stop the class and like, no, do this. And then I'm like bumping into other couples and
give you more space.
Yeah. And so they moved me to the edge of the class so that like I'm not bumping into people. And it was the worst. So that's brave and bold, man.
Yeah.
Salsa and swing.
She was salsa dancing. And like I said, in the Baptist church, which, interesting side note is, we like to dance together. Coloma's Mexican descent.
Yeah.
And I love Mexican dancing growing up in New Mexico.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm 6'2", and a half. Coloma's 5'4", and we always struggled partnering dancing.
Sure.
Like we literally had to practice for our wedding because we were like, this is not working. Both of us could dance independently.
Yeah.
But dance together. And literally about a year and a half ago, we finally figured it out.
Come on.
We've been together 22 years.
Yeah.
We finally figured it out. And the easiest little change changed everything. It was how I was holding her. Like I literally was holding her wrong.
That would preach.
Yeah, I'm telling you.
That has so many different parallels, right?
It does. It was the difference between me trying to be 6'2" and hold underneath her rib cage, as opposed to putting my arm on her shoulder and guiding her through that. I'm like, why does this ever work? And we were literally at Kalahari.
Yeah.
Dancing, and she's like, well, my brother, when we dance, he puts his arm here. I tried it, and I'm like, the world has opened up. We can dance together now.
So that needs to be an immediate, like, marriage conference title. How are you holding her? That's got to be
all over it,
right up in the front of that. That's awesome. So cool. So when you began, so were you an Aggie, not an Aggie? You were just doing the internship there?
I was, yeah. I was not an Aggie for academics, and still don't claim being an Aggie. Okay. I went there. So I did my undergraduate work and graduate work at Wayland Baptist University.
Yeah.
After undergraduate, I was kind of at that stage of I did religious studies
Cool.
for school, but wasn't sure what I was going to do with that.
Right.
According to my BSM director at the time, Baptist Student Ministries, I was supposed to go to the seminary because that's what every good little religious student's supposed to do.
Right.
And I was adamant about the fact that was not my next step in life.
Yeah.
But didn't know what it was, and got an internship. That my senior year in college, I was the statewide Baptist Student Union president.
Right.
And there was openings at different BSUs to intern. So I interviewed at a couple of places and got hired at Texas A&M for their Baptist Student Ministries.
But ministry was in your picture, right? So like walk me through, you were in ministry, full-time ministry, pastoral ministry. Talk me through that season.
Yeah. So in college, I interned mostly like with student ministry and did that throughout college ministry weekend stuff, all through starting actually in 19 with my youth minister. I interned for a year, went to a junior college, interned with him, and then moved to Wayland. So all through college, I did different local ministries, local missions, that kind of stuff throughout college. And BSM was kind of that gateway to figure out ministry is it, but what did that look like?
Right.
At the time, I didn't feel a call to be a lead pastor. And so I was like, but what does ministry look like? And so BSM kind of seemed like a good buffer between what do I do and what I don't know what I want to do. So did that. So it was technically a ministry position. And from there went to be a youth pastor immediately following that back in my home church, actually, where I became a Christian.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
Yeah, I followed my youth pastor, the guy that was my mentor, that led me to Christ, all that stuff. I followed him.
Yeah.
From him leaving the church, I wouldn't have replaced him in the position.
And now, so ministry, obviously we could probably talk about that for a long time, but then ministry into, how did you make the transition from ministry into what you're doing now?
I think for the longest time I knew some sort of social ministry was in our cards.
Right.
I think all of the work Clem and I both did when we were in ministry, it always was stuff outside of the walls of the church.
Yeah.
Like we would kill it at mission trips, local mission stuff. We were always doing stuff outside the walls to the degree that sometimes it got me in trouble.
Okay.
Like I'd be like, hey, you remember you've got to be here too? But it was always a draw. And because we worked so much with young people, it was kind of we were seeing stuff that I didn't know what to do with.
Right.
We'd have kids talking about suicide, talking about just difficult things.
Yeah.
No clue what to do with it.
Right.
And at some point I was like, I've got to do something. This is always in our front door.
Yeah.
We've got to do something about it. So graduate school is kind of the thing. I even had a ministry leader at one point tell me, hey, you're doing social work. What do you need to go back to school for?
Oh, okay.
And I was like, I agree, but I don't.
Kind of.
Yeah. But you still aren't teaching me how to deal with this child who's dealing with suicide.
Yeah.
You're not helping me understand this child's with abuse.
Yeah.
You're saying pray for them, but that's not going anywhere. And I feel like I'm supposed to do something different. And so I did. I went back to graduate school and got my degree and actually toyed back and forth for a little while because I thought, well, am I supposed to be in ministry? Because that's what I'm called to.
Yeah.
But I'm going to do this. And so I went back and forth. I taught school for a year in between there. And even went back for a year and a half. I got called as a lead pastor at a church back in West Texas.
Wow.
And I did that for a year and a half. And in that year and a half, it became abundantly clear that was not what I was supposed to do.
So being a lead pastor, you were like, this is not for me.
Very much so.
People always think like being a lead pastor is super fun.
No.
It's not.
No.
It's not.
That's why I pray really hard for you.
Yeah. It's what's also really funny is like when you meet people, listen, there are definitely contexts where you're bivocational, where like you're pastoring, but also you have a corporate job or a day job. But it's always funny when people, like I'll meet people and they're like, so like, what else do you do?
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, I mean, this is pretty much it.
This is it.
There's a lot to this. And so there's been a few times I'm like, why don't you just spend the day with me and just see all the things that we do and think through and have to process with people and finances and staff and strategy and then write a message in there and make sure it's good. Because if it's not good,
you're going to get in trouble.
Yeah, like people aren't going to come back. So that's always, that's always fun. So describe to me what it is now, like that you do full time. That like this is the central thrust of our purpose and mission.
Yeah. So part of that, the transition is I learned really quickly. I was actually called to shepherd people. Like I know that I'm a pastor.
Yeah.
I'm not a preacher.
Yeah.
Right. And that was where the contrast was for a long time.
Yeah.
Was I knew that I was called to care for people.
Yeah.
And more importantly, I think I was called to care for people in their junk.
Yeah.
And just didn't feel like that was the lead pastor was not the context for that.
Yeah.
And so that's when the graduate school came back in and went and got my master's degree in counseling. And so now I own a private practice in counseling here in Pflugerville. Primarily now work with couples. My focus is family. I strongly believe that the sustainable wellness only happens in the context of a family. And so whether I'm seeing an individual, a couple, everything comes back to what does this do to affect your family, whatever that role is in that family. So I will see young people right now down to age 15. I'm blessed that our counseling practice is full enough that I can be really picky about who I work with. And so I will do individuals, males particularly, down to age 15 and up. If I see anybody under 15, it is required for them to have family counseling. I will not see anybody under 15 unless it's family. Because you think about it, when they leave me for that hour, who gets to have them for the rest of that time? So if I'm not equipping you as a parent to do the work, it's really kind of useless.
Brett, that is, first of all, there's tons to unpack there, which I totally want to jump into.
Yeah.
But that's amazing, especially being a youth pastor. You being a youth pastor, they give you their child for an hour, and they're like, "Can you fix them?"
Right.
And it's like, "No, that's your job.
Right.
I will come alongside and help you, and we will reinforce some things, but it's not my job." But I want to go back to this idea of I realized I was a pastor, I just wasn't a preacher, and that's something that I think. On varying degrees, right? There's multiple levels that obviously you do that professionally, right? But that's also part of your call and purpose and training and all that kind of all those type of things. I think if there were more people in the church that could capture that mindset, right, of going, "Hey, I'm called to pastor people." But it may not look like strategy. It may not look like preaching. It may not look like all the things I'm used to. Right. But there's really deep fulfillment and purpose, and that's messy. What do you think? Probably some of the challenges when you kind of have come to understand that. Where do you find that challenge when it's difficult for people to grasp that?
Yeah. Well, because I think for myself, and I see it now for people, is especially in the Christian world, at least in the black culture, the pastor was it.
He's the man of God.
He's the man of God.
He's a bishop.
It's on the top, right?
Yeah.
He's everything. And so there's a level of pride in that, right?
Yeah.
Of wanting to be that person.
Sure.
Because there's some status with it. There's name. There's prestige.
Yeah.
All the stuff that comes with it. But they forget all the other stuff that you mentioned, right? And so I think for the longest time, I was caught up in that of what was expected of me. My grandmother, literally at probably about age 11, 10, somewhere in there, I don't remember exactly age, told me, "Hey, you're going to be a pastor one day." And my response was, "I'm not like the guy I saw up front." I was like, "I ain't doing that." No, thanks, Grandma. No, but no.
Yeah.
But at the same time, someone that was very integral in my life, there was this pressure or expectation.
Yeah.
This is what this looks like. And so over time, even through education, I think that's what people battle with, is seeing ministry or calling means it's got to be done primarily in the church as a vocation, as opposed to no, calling is on you, and it's going to be fulfilled in many different ways.
100%.
And so for me, when I landed there, is where peace came, and I was like, okay, I know I have a calling to shepherd people.
Right.
It is not in the context of me being a lead pastor, but it is in counseling. It's in mentoring, it's in ushering, it's in, right, to shepherd people and do that well and leading people.
Wow.
That's the piece that came from me.
There's so many, like, especially, like in church world, there's so many crazy cultural challenges that aren't biblical. I remember, with that whole man of God, like, hey, you're the bishop, you're the guy. There was a pastor that was pastoring a small church, so therefore, the finances weren't there and he wasn't bringing in a full-time salary, but he had to be able to appear blessed, right? Because then his church the people in his church wouldn't want to come to his church because, like, if you're not driving a Cadillac, if you're not driving a Lexus, then you ain't blessed, and I'm not going to go to your church because if you ain't blessed, I'm not going to get blessed. And so he was literally financially digging himself in a hole just to keep up the appearance of the man of God, of the one who was getting the blessing. But I think going back to that idea of there's a calling on my life, there's a purpose on my life, and it may not happen in certain venues because ultimately, you probably experienced this being a lead pastor, like doing a good job as a lead pastor is much more painful than it is profitable, right? Like, because you can hide away, you can be the green room guy, you can just like go to your cave, get a word from the Lord, come out and deliver it and think you're done.
Right.
But that's not leading. That's not really helping an organization. That's not pastoring people from that position.
For real.
So one of the things that I'm a big advocate in counseling. Like I'm somebody who goes to counseling. I love counseling. I pay for my staff to go to counseling. It's part of their expectation of going, you need to process things with other people.
Right.
Here's the challenge when I go to counseling, and I want you to help me out. There's like I'll go in and this is for somebody who's never been to counseling.
Yeah.
So it's like, what do I talk about? And then when I do go in, I suddenly find myself talking about things that I didn't plan on talking about, and then I somewhat regret talking about. And it's like, how do I go into, how do I make the most of it?
Yeah.
Instead of like, so what do you want to talk about? And that's what my counselor does every time. So what do you want to talk about? I'm like, I don't know. Like,
that's why I'm here.
You tell me what we need to talk about. So like from somebody on the other side, like how do I maximize a counseling session or a relationship?
Yeah. Oh man, I think there's two parts to that. There's the role of the therapist, and then obviously the person coming in. One, I think I consider myself pretty solution focused in that, hey, you're coming in for a reason. Let's figure out what that is. And so I want to know that. Like, I want to know, or you just need someone to talk to, then maybe you should go talk to a friend and not pay me.
Right.
Right. So it's cool to have a glorified friend. But and so I kind of really want to know as a therapist, like what are the desired outcomes? And the hard part is sometimes people don't know, right? They don't know. I just know that I'm feeling some sort of way and I need some help with that. Well, my job is to try to explore that and help you discover what is it? What is the cause of this funk? Yeah. And so I should be skilled at asking those questions. I think what happens, and it's very popular right now, is I'm going to hold a space for you, and we're just going to go wherever you want to go,
right,
and explore. And I'm like, again, I could do that with a friend or with my wife, like, and not have to pay money to do that. And so I think that, one, the role of that therapist is extremely important, and that having that desire and vision to do that. That may be style, that may be my preference, but I think it's effective. So I think that's one. But the other is the person coming in is having somewhat of an idea why. Like, why am I going to a therapist? Like, and in that, like you would go for a job, when you go and interview someone, like go on an interview, there's some things you expect.
Yeah.
Like, if I'm going to pay you for a service, I expect for you to deliver.
Yeah.
And so I tell folks, go in ready. And hey, you may not have all the answers. You may not even have defined everything that you want to work on, but go in and asking the person, this is what's going on in my life. What are your opinions, thoughts, training to address these things? If they can't answer that for you, you probably need to spend your money somewhere else. Because if they don't have some level of a framework of how to address it, then you're probably going to be sitting there holding space together and paying a whole lot of money. And so really when you walk in, ask questions. Be curious about what their approach is. Be curious about the person. Like, literally, when people come to my office, whether it's a couple, individual, I'll ask every client, what do you want to know about me? What questions do you have? Probably 90% of the time, the person is looking at me like they're lost in space. Like, I didn't know I should have questions, right? And I'm like, well, you're fixing to give me all of this stuff about your life. You're about to put all your dirt on the table to someone you don't know. Wouldn't it be good to know a little bit more about me and who you're talking to? So don't be afraid to get to know that person, because again, you're trusting very intimate parts of your life with them.
Right.
And if you're not comfortable there, you're not going to get the work done. Like, you're not going to get to the stuff because you're holding back because you don't know who they are. You don't know if you can trust them. You don't know what their plans are. So why would you sit in a space and just disclose everything that's going on to someone you don't know and you don't trust? And so build that.
So this is a lighter angle at that, and so I'm not trying to be humorous with it, but have you ever struggled to keep a straight face?
Oh yeah.
Like, that's gotta be, like, you gotta tell me, like, I mean, obviously there's client, patient confidentiality, but like, have you ever, like, someone's like, this is a really big problem and I'm just struggling with this, and they're building it up, and then they tell you, and it's like,
that's it.
I don't know. Has that ever happened to
All
you?
the time.
How do you handle it? Do you just own it? Or?
Yeah, I own it. Coloma, my wife, is probably the first person to tell you I'm a therapist, but I have the worst poker face.
Okay.
Like, it's going to be written all over my face, so I might as well say something about it. Right?
That's awesome.
So if it's incessant, if I'm in shock, I will straight up tell you, especially with young people, right? If something's coming out, I'm like, hey, that one caught me off guard.
Yeah.
I'll just own it, right? Because I'm laughing, or if I'm crying, or whatever it is, I'm going to be real with you in that moment. I will tell you, there are some times that I hear stuff that's like book and movie worthy.
Oh, that's amazing.
And then I'm like, wow, okay,
Cool.
okay. I don't know where we're going to go with that, but let's figure it out.
Let's figure that out, right?
Let's walk through it together, because there are some
that.
times that things just come out and you're just like, I wasn't expecting that. And it's not so much that what they did or experienced was so bad.
Yeah.
It's either getting to know someone or having a perception of who they are, a prejudgment.
Yeah.
And then you hear and you're like, oh, that's not what I was expecting from you.
Right.
And so I think that's what happens sometimes, is because they're like, oh, that completely
Throws you off
from left field.
Yeah, there was one time I was praying. There was a lady that came for prayer, right? And she says, "Hey, I'm having dark thoughts," and I go, "Oh, okay. Well, how can I pray with you?" And she was like, "Well, can I share them with you?" And I go, "No, you don't have to. I don't need that. Like, if I can just pray for you." She was like, "No, I want to share." And so at this point, I'm like, "Okay, this woman's determined. She wants to tell me things." And I always have another person with me, so it wasn't just her and I isolated.
Yeah.
So I had somebody with me. She was like, "I want to share my dark thoughts." And again, it's this younger woman, and she's got a child, and she's struggling with dark thoughts. And so I'm thinking maybe the stress of motherhood. I'm just, you go to those preformed decisions in your mind and talking about throwing you off. And she looks at me, and she goes, "I've been having dark thoughts about harming your wife and your baby." And I was like, okay. Security? Like immediately, it's like, can you please come over here? And it's, at that point, I'm like, listen, I'm not even getting in this thing, right? Like, you got personal. Yeah. So a similar type of deal of like you having to adjust, and you have these preformed ideas. There was another situation. This one's funny. Okay, so we bring in a guest speaker. He's a national speaker, right? Like, he's popular. He's on Instagram and YouTube and like these mega churches and all these types of things. So we bring this preacher in. He preaches a great message. He's sitting the whole time during worship. Like, the whole time during worship, he's sitting on the front row, arms crossed, eyes closed, the whole time. Doesn't stand up once. When they introduce him, and now introducing and he stands up, goes on, preaches a fire message, starts walking out. I'm his escort out of the room. There's a woman that says, "Will you pray for me?" Right? So she pauses and says, "Will you pray for me?" And so he goes, "Yes, sure." And he begins to pray. Puts her hand on the shoulder. She puts her hands up like this, and he places a hand on her shoulder, and he begins to pray, and she sneezes right in his face. Just absolutely direct. The dude was in Jesus, and he stops his prayer, looks at her, and just walks out. Doesn't finish it, just walks straight out. So I'm sure there's moments that you've had in your practice where it's just like, that was unexpected. I don't know how to react to that. So now I'm somebody that had to be convinced of it, right? Counseling. Because for me, it was, well, there's nothing wrong right now. Yeah. Right? Like, I'm not suicidal. Right. I'm not depressed. And I think people think when it comes to counseling that it's like the last thing you do, right? Like, I can't figure it out. If somebody's listening to this, like, why does someone need to make counseling a regular part of their life? Or should they? Does it kind of work like with your physical health? Cool. I know I have workouts 3 to 4 times a week, right? And maybe my mental health isn't the same. Maybe it's not the same frequency. I'm sure you would prescribe that. But you're talking to the skeptic, and they're going, nothing's wrong. Why do I need counseling? What's your typical response?
I would go where you said as far as physically, right? We do a lot of things to take care of we should do a lot of things to take care of ourselves. Right? We should. There's a lot of shoulds there. That to take care of our well-being. And so I don't know that I completely prescribe to the fact that everyone should go to counseling. Right. I think it's being able to have good people in your life where you're looking at, say, hey, if we're hanging out and we're friends, and I'm like, man, Eric, you're putting on some pounds, bro.
Yeah, you got somebody in your life.
Yeah. It's like when you working out? Like, how you doing?
Yeah.
And I'm noticing some things, or you may be noticing yourself. There's probably something you should do about it, right? And taking care of that because you want to be better. And so when it comes to counseling, is if all those things that you may have tried and you've worked on aren't doing what you hope they would do, then maybe you need someone that's been differently trained or specifically trained to help you through that process. I think the problem is when I hear someone say that, it's possible sometimes that they don't have those other supports and balances in their lives.
Yeah.
And so because there are folks that are able to work through life's problems that don't need to see a professional and work through those things. However, when someone is that hesitant, my first question is, who is speaking into your life in other areas of your life?
Right.
And oftentimes the answer is, I don't know. Nobody.
Instagram, TikTok.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, then maybe you need to go to counseling.
Right.
And you need to make sure you're surrounded by other people who are speaking life into you.
Sure.
And so it's usually I've come in another door of if you're hesitant, there's a reason why you're hesitant. Either you've had a bad experience, you've heard people's bad experiences, or you have a cultural bias against it. There are other reasons why you don't want to go do that. And help me explore that with you a little bit, and then we may conclude, no, you don't need to go to counseling, or hey, maybe go try it. I think the other part of that question then becomes, we think to the extremes, right? We think only depression, only anxiety, only problem. But again, I go to the maybe medical and nutritional. We are reactive people. And so I'm going to react to whatever's going on, hindsight, as opposed to, I'm going to be a little more preventative. I want a really, really healthy marriage.
Oh, that has changed the game for me.
I want to go to healthy marriage. But, I'm not going to go see anybody to help us with that. Until it's really bad problems. Right. As opposed to, no, we don't have the tools. Maybe we have some idea. Here's some things, but we don't really have the tools. So let's go find someone to help us with the tools. To have the really healthy marriage that we want.
Probably counseling for me has helped me more in my marriage than any other space. And we've never done couples counseling. It's literally just been me, like going and figuring me out and then bringing that into the marriage. And it's been an absolute game changer. And the biggest thing is, like you said, having communication tools, having processing tools, knowing like, okay, why am I feeling these type of things? And one of my things the counselor always would say to me, because he used to be a Navy medic. And so he used to say, the bleeding stops one way or the other. You either bleed out or we fix it. So like, it's going to stop eventually. The question is like, what's the result? And that kind of put it into context for me of like, okay. But the challenge I think in the Christian world is that idea of all I need is the Holy Spirit, right? I just need my sola scriptura, right? I just need my Bible. I just need the Holy Spirit. If I'm a Christian, why is counseling a good Christian exercise or relationship to engage in?
So you've said this from the pulpit a few times, right? So if I, as a Christian, just decided I need to go live on a mountain by myself, and all I needed was Jesus for us to sit there and worship and be holy and eat grass or whatever it is that we're going to do, right? I'm good, because that's what
There's manna up there. That's
exactly,
the only spot it's left, right?
So it's like, why have that? As opposed to, we aren't an island. We weren't created as individuals. And so insight from others, perspective from others of what they see in our lives and what we're going through is huge, because we have blinders on and we develop ways of coping through life's difficulties. And until we're shown something different, we don't know that there's a different way or that there's even a need. And so someone either skilled to do that or just has a different perspective to do that. And so for Christians, I think what happens is they feel like, well, I'm just going to pray harder. The Holy Spirit's going to be there. And I'm like, yes, 100%. All right. But when was the last time the manna fell for you that I'm really hungry and it's just going to fall from the sky? So let me just pray. No, you're probably going to go to work and get some money and go to the grocery store. That's probably what's going to happen. So if something's happening, the Lord has provided solutions for that. What I do tell Christians sometimes is you don't have to see a Christian counselor that maybe says I'm a Christian. it depends on where your convictions are, right?
Yeah.
If you're solid with the Lord, but you're just still kind of dealing with some stuff,
Yeah.
then maybe you can kind of work through that with an individual who's trained.
Yeah.
However, is if you have somebody that understands the power of the Holy Spirit, someone that understands the importance of Scripture,
Yeah.
and that's a part of your life, then that person probably should have that same perspective when you're sitting down and talking through life's difficulties, because they're going to give you some guidance according to your value system,
Right.
And help you through that.
See, that's the thing though I wanted to engage on is this idea, because this is what's happening in people that are younger than me, kind of the young up and coming generation, where like therapy is like cool, right? It's super trendy. My therapist, and what people end up doing is they replace God, Scripture, and community with their therapist, right? And so their therapist becomes the Holy Spirit in their life, or comes Scripture in their life, and it's like, well, my therapist said and it's like, yeah, but the Bible didn't, and so like, how in that area, in that space, how are people to navigate, and what's one of those pitfalls of going, like, and I guess that the challenge would be, because we live in a generation, because we live in an age where a lot of people have literally no other voices, right? No other voices. And so they pay this person, and it's the first person that they've had extended conversations with about the deep things in their heart. And there's all of a sudden maybe an unhealthy emotional connection where this is the first person that understands me, this first person hears me. And sometimes it can be a therapeutic situation rather than like, okay, let's grow, let's work through this.
Right.
So how have you navigated? What would you kind of react to that?
So, one, to speak to what's happening.
I know it's loaded, right?
There's a lot of... It's loaded, but I think you think about like, probably one of the banes of my existence as a therapist is when someone comes in and they already have their diagnosis. They already know all the symptoms, right? Because they went to Dr. Google and understand what's happening. And so there's automatically a label of, it's my anxiety, it's my depression. So who told you had depression and anxiety? Well, I looked it up, and I'm like, oh, right, here we go.
Yeah.
Right. So because it's a double-edged sword, because it's great that we do have resources, right? And we do have access to things that we probably didn't have access before, but we have access. And so individuals are automatically taking on identity that is not theirs to take on. And so they walk into the office of my depression, my anxiety, my trauma, like, that's a whole nother conversation, right?
That is a conversation. We should go there.
Okay. So everybody literally sits in my office and they're like, my trauma. And I'm like, okay, so define that for me, please. Like, what was your trauma? And I was like, who told you that was trauma? Like, I do believe that it's the individual to identify something as traumatic.
Yes.
Right? However, it is kind of trendy. Like, it's scary that trauma is a trendy thing. And so literally I've heard therapists say everyone has trauma. And that is not true.
Right.
How someone experienced something maybe became very resilient in their life, and they don't see that as traumatic. That's their ability to make that
navigate
make that decision, right? And so it's being able to figure out like what is truly happening and going on, and let's begin defining that. And how have you learned to cope with that or to regulate through that?
Yeah.
And challenging it, like literally being able to challenge it. I think part of the obstacle right now is it's just freedom to be and do as you want to, and how I feel is how I feel, and this is okay, and this is what's right. It's like, well, it's oftentimes someone comes in, I will tell them, you're not dealing with depression. You've got some stupid habits that you've created.
Yeah, you stay up till 3 a.m. watching YouTube, and then you have no purpose in your life, and that's why you feel lousy.
Yep, because you think, and this is probably, I know comes from my own conviction.
Yeah.
Well, the Lord is, to someone and just sit, I'm like, that's not your identity. Your depression, your trauma is not your identity. And unfortunately, I think what happens in the world of psychology right now is that is what's happening. Everybody's being labeled as their experience.
Well, it's just easy, right? It's like a lazy, easy thing just to slap a giant sticker on. And I think, so similar, I mean, I don't want to derail it because I want to stay on this, but it's a similar situation when it comes to church hurt, right? People are like, oh, I'm church hurt. I'm like, no, someone just told you were being dumb and you were living outside of the will of God. That's not church hurt, that's conviction, right? And like, obviously there's stories of actual real situations, but when everything is labeled that, and then you find your way into the church and someone's going, hey, you're living outside of Scripture, I really think you should consider this. And then it's like all of a sudden the pastor or the connect group leader or the, whoever the person is in their life, they're going, oh, this church hurt me, I'm through with church. I'm like, no, that's not church hurt,
Right.
right? That's confrontation. And sometimes confrontation can be really, really healthy.
Yeah.
So when it comes to trauma, because I'm even hearing the conversations from my middle schoolers, right? Like they're using these things in really trendy ways. And it's almost like how I would use slang as a kid. They're using trauma and triggered and different things. Like I even heard my daughter the other day say she was emotionally abused. And I'm like, how do you know what that is? Like, what? And I was like, what happened? And I think she ended up telling me that she got grounded. And I'm like, that's parenting.
Exactly.
That's not emotional abuse. And so then we live in a culture that continues to build up trauma and triggeredness and it kind of like devalues the real, like when people are really going through something like that versus, hey, sometimes life is just hard.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I think it's a really weird double bind because, you know, for so long it was not acceptable to talk about mental health. It wasn't acceptable to talk about difficulty, right? And so, unfortunately, I think we've swung the pendulum a little too far, and that now it's like that's the only thing that's cool to talk about, as opposed to helping people know a healthy way to figure out we all have trouble. That's a promise, right? And figuring out what does that look like and what's happening. I think what happens, at least for me in practice, is I don't personally believe that I should be seeing someone for 2, 3, 4, 5 years in therapy. Yeah. Like now someone to check in with every once in a while and do whatever. It's like, how do I help you get to a healthy place to know how to navigate systems outside of this place to work through things? And there's a dependency that's built, I think, in two ways. I think the client becomes dependent on the therapist, and the therapist becomes dependent on the client for money, for whatever it might be. And so there's this built of, hey, let's go explore something. Or you have folks that aren't willing to be, as you said, direct. Literally had a couple this week that came in, told me about their history, told me about a number of things, like, do this without, disclosing. Told me about a number of things. And I told the couple, I was like, I can't see you.
Wow.
And the husband is livid.
Right.
Like, what do you mean you can't see us? You're a therapist. No, you've had multiple marriages. You've done X, Y, Z, and you come in and told me kind of your history. You have made up your mind that you're right, that there's not going to be changes. Right. And what's going on. So what do you expect me to do? Like, help me understand what my role is in getting your wife to get on your page. Like, I don't see where I play a role in that. And he's like, well, we need to work through stuff. You do need to work things, but where you need to start.
You got stuff to work on.
And so I get to choose to not be a part of that process because you're not seeing your role in that. And so we're going to come in. What's going to happen is you're going to come in and I'm going to get to watch a battle, and you're going to leave my office out an hour and a half later and battle some more and then come back and do it again. I'm not signing up for that. Right. That's not where I am. And the hard part is I think people think that, well, because I'm a therapist, I'm just supposed to take anybody, everyone, whatever's happening. And I think that's the unfortunate part of that big pendulum swing is that, well, I'm here for everyone, whatever their needs are, whatever it might be. And it's like, no, that's not healthy.
Sure. And I'm sure people that have come into your office use you. Right, they have they have an angle, especially in couples, that they're wanting to get to, and they're wanting somehow the therapist to validate that position, right? And so then all of a sudden, when the therapist is like, "No," it's like, "Well, I'll just go find another one," right? Like I'll just search until I find validity. But I think that's such a powerful point of going, because it was so unpopular, so frowned upon. That it then swings, and for me, it's just like moving forward, like as a church, as a pastor. Like, what are the current things right now? I don't have them, but it's like a good idea to always be evaluating. What are the current things right now that we could be creating a pendulum with in the next generation or the generation after that? Yeah. So, like, what are the things in the church when it comes to scripture, comes to how we do church, that if we're not careful and we don't stay measured in it and balanced in it, that ultimately we're setting up that next generation to swing way out on something? Like for me growing up, in the church, it was like no movies, no video games. My grandma wouldn't let us have playing cards. Like it was like a really religious, structured. And then all of my friends, the minute that they got out of that, the pendulum swung to this, like they went bananas, like crazy, full on. And you would think like this little saint homeschool kid never saw anything. And it's like, I don't even know you, because it was like, I was never taught how to, hey, we can watch movies, but we're wise in which ones we choose.
Watch,
yeah. Like, this is funny. The first movie I ever went to in a movie theater, it was like I took a bath of blood. It was Saving Private Ryan.
Oh, goodness.
Was my first movie. I'm like,
I've never seen it, actually.
okay, the first scene, you see like 17 intestines and legs being blown off and about 47 F words. And it was like, that's the first one we go to. So it was just.
How old were you?
I was like 14. But I'd never been to a movie theater.
Yeah.
And so it's so immersive, right? Like I'd never sat in a movie theater with all the audio and the giant screen in front of me. And I felt like the opening scene, which is the Normandy scene, they're charging the beaches and all that kind of stuff, which is just brutal.
Yeah.
I felt like that lasted like an hour. Like I'm just like this 14-year-old kid just like never been in a theater, right? Like all I watched was like Salty and the Psalm Book and like cheesy, like I think Homeward Bound was like our Friday night movie with the dogs and they're making their way home. And I go from that to Saving Private Ryan. I was just like, oh my goodness. But creating, going back to and like thinking through those things and being aware of like, and obviously not living in fear and where it's always, but just trying to have a healthy awareness of like, on the things that we're extreme in, could we be creating a pendulum that's really not setting up the next generation very well, but being measured and balanced in that? So,
you know, what that brings to mind for me, Eric, I think it's probably what really drives me right now is I think one of the pendulums that may be shifting in the wrong direction is family.
yeah,
What you just described was generations probably of how to do life, right? And how to see the world. And how that affects your worldview, all of good, right? That's all a good thing. The hard part is, I think, though, is that right now we're at a place where we have gotten, whether it's social media, it is other influences. So I think, in my opinion, as a little side note, I think social media has just enhanced what's always been there.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. Porn, all that stuff's always been there. It's just enhanced it and give you more access to it now, right? However, what I do think is happening is that we've become so independent of that unit that we're now building generations that are no longer dependent on their families.
Right.
No longer building generations that look to their families.
Right.
And so you had where it's easy for maybe a younger generation to say so-and-so didn't do this or my mom and dad didn't or whatever it is because maybe generations before them didn't teach them. So we're literally getting to a place where family is becoming obsolete.
Right.
And it's not becoming where, hey, that's where I'm going to look to for stability. And so it's looking to social media, it's looking to what social society says, it says, as opposed to really building strong, healthy families. Yeah. And so that, to me, that would be a fear, is that it's like, hey, what are we doing to make sure that individuals know that it's a place to have fun, it's a place to cry, it's to all those different things, but we're not looking to the family anymore. And yet, where does, if we start, at least for what I do, right? Where do we start looking to when we talk about pain, trauma, difficulty?
Absolutely.
We look to what happened in my family. And so it's a place to blame, but it's not a place to begin building stability.
Well, you know, and I've even had to walk through this stuff. Like family origin is a big deal, right? It kind of frames how you think and process and all those types of things. But from a pastoral seat and watching it, it's a significant thing, this idea of family eroding, right? Because that's a centerpiece for truth and discipleship and processing. And one of the things that we do in our family, and by no means are we perfect or have it right, but we do Morris Mondays. And so like Monday is blocked off. It's family time. Yes, we eat together on other days, but that's the one day where we're like, hell or high water, we're doing this. And we do a thing like, tell me your highs and lows, tell me your best part of your day, tell me the worst part of your day, and then we don't react to it like in a weird way, right? Like, hey, I'm really sorry that happened to you. Or, hey, that's awesome. And just getting our kids, because that's one of those things of like, we want our kids to be able to talk about everything. So we want to hear the good stuff, we want to hear the bad stuff. And sometimes it's like, hey, I got detention. Like, okay, well, that was a bad decision. Right. Cool. But it ends there. But it's just a space for them. But from like, and not to get like super metaphysical or like way up there, but really you see that in the culture of they want to destroy church, and they want to destroy family, because these are the two pillars
Yep.
on how people establish identity and truth, and they develop community. And it's ultimately, if I can destroy church and family, then I can isolate you,
Yep.
I can indoctrinate you, and now you just become the clone of the culture, and we drive you where
Yeah.
we want to.
Yeah. We were talking, I guess I don't know if we were recorded yet or not, but we were talking a little bit about the last podcast or whatever I was on.
Yeah.
Right. And we were talking about black men kind of
Yeah.
experiences. And I think what started that conversation was someone in a conversation or a forum was talking about how black men right now, society tells them they can't have emotions and
Right.
don't know what the emotions are. And there's a whole lot of things were underneath that. My challenge back to that group was, it's like, at what point, let's say you get healthy,
Yeah.
right? Let's say you find emotions and things are great and going on. Do you go back to society and say, is it okay? Hey, did I make the mark now?
Yeah.
Why is society your parameter?
That's so good.
Like, why is it? So society has such a hold on you.
Why do they need to approve of me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's really being able to see that, hey, there's other ways to explore that are healthy, because that's always shifting. You and I know that,
Yeah.
right? What society approves of, the government approves of, or whatever it is, that's going to change.
It's going to move all the time.
And so me being okay is now based upon something that's constantly shifting.
Yeah. Yes.
Why?
Yeah.
Okay, so cool. Now, how do you find something that's long lasting?
Yeah.
That's never changing.
Yeah.
We'd probably hear some scripture on that. There wasn't like it wasn't a Christian thing.
Right.
But I can't help it.
Yeah.
in that
Yeah,
manner.
no,
But it's being able to say that, why is that? Right.
Right.
And so what I think people are longing for is that what's sustainable, that's long lasting.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, they come to my office because it's always looked into as something that's always fleeting.
Yeah.
Society,
Yeah.
people, whatever it might be.
One of the things that I discovered, a couple months ago, because the challenge is one of the narratives is in the black community that black fatherhood is a real challenge, right? And I stumbled across this Instagram account that literally was like an Instagram account called Black Fathers, and it was like, I'm literally like just crying looking at this Instagram account, because all it's doing, just as a father, right? Right, whether white or black, like just as a dad, because you rarely see those things celebrated. Like being there, being faithful, being steady, not being like a fly off the handle, like I'm an absent, but just being a present father. And I tell people all the time, the greatest reward in my life is literally, and so the other day, we're playing baseball, and Winston, sometimes, he's like, I struck out, all that kind of stuff, all the normal performative things. And so on Saturday, one of the dads come up and they say, hey, Winston, he's a great kid. Like, he always has a good attitude. And I saw him when one of the other kids struck out. Winston went over and consoled him. And he was the only one that went over, and, all those couple of things. And I was out on the field coaching, so I don't see this. And here's what was funny. I tell that story not to say this about me, because I'm going to get to the point. Is on the car ride from practice last night, I'm talking to him, and I have congratulated him on, like, hey, good hit, good steal, good things. And it's like, oh yeah, thanks, Dad. But I was like, hey, can I tell you what made me really proud of you? Is that you're a good young man with good character, and you could literally feel him melting in the car. And it's like, that is amazing.
Yeah.
And I think the more that we can, in obviously the different spaces that we're in, the more that we can go, hey, being a dad is super hard, but like your family is so vital. Yeah. And then when you discover those emotions, you connect with those things, you can be tender, you can feel, and the approval that you need is your local church and the leaders and the men that are walking with you and your family. Yeah. And it's like, listen, I don't care what society's doing, right? Yeah. Like, I got these people. I'm here for it. Yeah. Like, where do we go?
Yeah.
So, man.
And you hit something really important. Like, when we're out of that fellowship that we forget it. Like, you're trying to be a great dad, trying to be a great husband, but where do I have any reference point to what that looks like, right? And so if you're out of fellowship, you could be thinking, man, I'm doing horrible because my son's not doing well in baseball, or whatever's happening. You have a chance to be, comparison maybe is not the best word, but something to measure against, to think, all right, man, it's great to see that and
Yeah.
to share that and to be challenged there and to know when I'm not doing it right, but man, I get to celebrate when I'm doing it well, or that get to see that my son is hitting it,
Yeah.
right? And
Right.
maybe I did that, maybe I didn't,
Yeah.
but man, we get to celebrate it because it's who God is making them to be.
Do you
fun.
find that when people are more isolated, they are more naive to the reality of how they are, or they are more hard on themselves and therefore think that they're underperforming, they're worse off? What do you find the biggest in your interactions with men, kind of because you have no community and so you don't know, maybe you think I'm doing great, right?
Yeah. Honestly, I think both. Like, I think the
Right.
answer honestly is both. Because I mean, I tell somebody now, the value of what I get to do is that I'm just a glorified third person, right? In your
Yeah.
life is
Yeah,
that
yeah,
I
yeah.
get a chance to see into maybe what you can't see. And so I think sometimes that's the fear though, is because we don't want someone to show what we may already be aware of,
Yeah.
and don't want to face, or we don't want to know what we don't want to know,
Yeah.
or what we don't know. And so I think it's that both can happen.
Sure.
Just because you're not looking into a mirror, so how will you ever know what you look like?
Yeah.
And so why would I change anything?
Right.
If I got a booger in my nose, if no one's ever,
check.
nobody ever's telling me, somebody's
Yeah.
gonna walk around with whatever's happening. And so
Yeah.
that's what I think sometimes, especially with men,
Yeah.
is pride, poor self-esteem,
Right.
all of those things we figure out, and I don't think it's just men, I think it's everybody,
Right.
but it's strong with men, because I work with so many men, is that I figured out how to compensate.
Yep. They cope.
And I think it's okay. It's at least working for me.
Yeah.
And I don't know if my pride's going to let someone else tell me that it's not. And so I'm not going to go talk to a therapist because they might actually see me for the fraud that
Right.
I am being, or point out what I don't want to see.
Yeah.
And so I think that becomes the obstacle, that it's like, I don't want the introspective work.
Right.
Because
It's
that may
working.
change.
It's fine. It may not be amazing, but I'm getting by.
Yeah.
Man, as just somebody who that was me, like it's easier to fix than you think it is, right? If you'll just go through the initial like shock and awe of, okay, this is who I am, and these are my issues, it's not as hard to fix as you think it is.
Right.
I tell a story a lot of a mentor in my life. I'm talking to him about church and growth and all the things like that, and he goes, "Hey, I'm not talking to you about church again." And I go, "Why?" He goes, "You got to be a better husband before I ever talk to you about church." And I was like, "What?" And like, he didn't really know a bunch of details, but he knew enough. And he was like, "Yeah, you're an a-hole of a husband, and you need to go figure that out." And I was like, "I'm not. No, I'm not." He goes, "Call your wife." And I was like, he goes, "Put it on speaker." Put it on speaker. And I was like, "Hey, so-and-so says I'm an a-hole." And she goes, "Oh my goodness, thank you so much for telling him. I am so glad that someone," but here's the thing, as like humiliating and as difficult as that was, it was like, well, crap.
Yeah.
But what it did, it kind of cleared the table to go, all right, then what do I need to do? And it didn't take long for me to become aware of those things, change those things, and then we were no longer just coping in our marriage.
Yeah.
It was like, man, I actually love our marriage. I love my and the more you can deal with it, the more you can go. And it's like, hey, it's a high pain threshold, but on the other side, you can do it.
Yeah. You mentioned it earlier. I think this kind of plays into it. So what is that unique when it comes to Christians, and therefore maybe ministers and pastors, is what is the behavior, the mask, the act that I'm supposed to do to keep the facade up about who I am, what I'm dealing with, or what I'm not, right? So I've got the best marriage, I'm the best dad, I'm the best whatever it might be. And have to carry that mantle, like whether you take it on or it's put on you, it's on you, right? And I think that is just heightened in the roles of pastor and leaders, but it's pervasive against Christians, is that it's all about my behavior and performance as opposed to substance. So I'm not gonna own that I've got something going on. Or what I oftentimes will tell people, it's the do's and don'ts of Christianity, right? We subscribe so much to the do's and don'ts,
the list,
as opposed to, no, I've got junk. I've got stuff going on. And it's okay that I've got stuff going on. I'm supposed to. But the humility is recognize I need someone to walk me through that. One, obviously the Lord. And then 2, that he puts other people in my life to do that. And the other side is much better.
Yeah.
But that's the hard part, right? It's because we don't, that's anxiety, that's depression, that's all those things. That's what you're dealing with.
Yeah.
Let's look at the other side, right? Let's look at the other side and see if that stuff lifts.
Right.
See if that stuff changes. And when someone tells me about, do I do medication? Do I not? Do I yada yada? And I'm like, well, let's look at these things.
There's some steps before that.
Let's talk about this first. Because that's where Dr. Google comes in. Is like, well, I looked at it. I'm supposed
I need
to
Zoloft right now.
Yeah, let's step back.
Some
first.
Prozac.
Yep.
Yeah. No, it's like there's like 7 things we can do before medication.
And if those don't work, then maybe
we'll talk about that.
The
That's on the table.
Yeah,
but down the road.
Not wanting to put that work in.
Yeah.
Yep.
Hey, Michael. Thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah,
this was fun. I know we've probably got 70 other things to talk about.
Sure.
But I appreciate it. I hope people find value in it. And thank you again for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Hope you got something good out of there.
Oh, I'm sure we did.